Older American viewers in particular will probably know Johnny Gruelle as the creator of the doll character Raggedy Ann. But here in Britain, and I suspect among younger viewers everywhere, his name means very little, and that's unsung enough for me. He was born in 1880 in Illinois, but when he was 2 the family moved to Indianapolis. His father was a professional painter, so Johnny was exposed to art from early childhood. None of the sources I've used mention any formal art education, and in 1901 he got married and moved to Cleveland, Ohio. 2 years later he became a cartoonist at the Indianapolis Star, and from 1906 onwards he was also creating cartoons, comic strips and caricatures for several other newspapers from further afield. In 1911 he entered and won a contest to create a new comic strip. This was the whimsical and aesthetically considered Mr. Tweedledee, which became very popular and was syndicated nationwide until 1918. In the wake of the strip's success, he moved to Connecticut, where he had a large country house and studio built. Around this time he began rewriting and illustrating fairy tales, and his first was a popular edition of Grimm's Tales in 1914, featuring both colour and monochrome illustration. And several others drawn from the usual children's classic collections followed in rapid succession, adding to Gruelle's already significant and successful output. In terms of his style and technique, Gruelle's real strength was in the expressive quality of his line in both his monochrome and colour work. But that's not to suggest his painting technique was in any way inferior, and he skillfully applied bright tonal washes of watercolour as well as flatter, more graphic colouring on occasion. In 1916 he collaborated with the writer Rose Hubble to produce books about the duck Quacky Doodles and her family, and wooden toys were produced and sold as popular merchandised items. Showing uncommon business acumen, in 1915 Gruelle had submitted his design for Raggedy Ann to the US Patent Office, and the first published story about the character appeared in 1918. The level of its success led to many more in following years, and she was soon joined by Raggedy Andy and several other endearing characters. Despite the volume of work and income this generated, Gruelle was simultaneously producing a series of complex pen and ink crowd scenes for the humour magazines Judge and Life. These intricate and totally absorbing pieces compelled the viewer to scan the total image to observe the various little narratives that were unfolding in different parts of the composition. And throughout the 1920s, alongside more Raggedy Ann stories, there were other unrelated books published. The story of Eddie Elephant appeared in 1921 and was quickly followed by The Magical Land of Noom and Johnny Mouse and the Wishing Stick, both published in 1922. By now Gruelle had become phenomenally successful, but there was no sign of him slowing the pace of his prodigious creativity. In 1929 the New York Herald Tribune syndicated Brutus, a rather backwards-looking but popular comic strip which continued to be published for the next decade. He relocated with his family to Florida in 1932, and from there he continued to produce yet more books. And by 1935 he had enlisted his son Justin to work with him as his assistant. Unfortunately, at the height of his popularity, Johnny Gruelle died unexpectedly and prematurely of heart failure in 1938 at the age of only 57. Federico Ribas was one of the great Spanish illustrators of the early 20th century, and he worked with great success in France and Argentina, as well as his home country. He was born in the village of Buzas as Federico Ribas Montenegro in 1890, but he dropped the maternal surname in adulthood. And although his family wanted him to go into medicine, he had little interest for anything that wasn't drawing or painting. So in his teens he worked for a year with the artist Julio González Polar, and soon after decided to sail from Spain to Argentina. When he arrived in Buenos Aires, he could only find work as a painter and decorator, but gradually moved into illustration and started drawing cartoons for various Argentinian magazines and newspapers. and after a couple of years of experience there, he set off for Paris in 1912. Not long after his arrival, he managed to get a full-time position as the artistic director of the magazine Mondial, while simultaneously freelancing for other magazines, including Le Rire. After 4 years working in Paris, he returned to Madrid in 1916, where he was welcomed by several popular magazines, including Blanco y Negro, La Esfera and Buen Humor. And in addition to the prodigious amounts of magazine illustration he created, he also began producing a stylish and astonishingly diverse range of posters and press ads, promoting all kinds of products, both glamorous and mundane. It's hard to think of an illustrator as stylistically and technically versatile as Ribas. He used colour which was flat and graphic, but was not averse to more painterly tonal application. And similarly, his use of line roamed freely between stylized precision through to more gestural expression. And he appeared to be equally at home with broad cartoon and more representational anatomy. In 1929 he became the manager of a large advertising company, and between that and his own freelance work, Ribas was doing exceptionally well. But when the Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936, the military forces took over, and once executions became commonplace, Ribas wisely and luckily managed to get on the next ship bound for Buenos Aires. On arrival in Argentina, his reputation was still strong enough to get him the job of director of the magazine Atlantis, and he continued to freelance with success alongside his supposedly full-time job. And in the mid-1940s he branched out into the illustration of comic books with the story of Don Quixote, followed by an equally contemporary visualization of Treasure Island. But with rapidly failing health he eventually decided to return to Spain in 1949, and he died there in 1952 at the age of only 62. Viktor Nikolaevich Denisov is better known by the shortened pseudonym Viktor Deni, but outside Russia he's hardly known at all by either name. He was born in 1893 in Moscow, and although he had received no formal art education, he moved to St. Petersburg in 1913 to try to find work as a political cartoonist and caricaturist. And through a mix of talent and persistence, his drawings were soon appearing in several illustrated satirical journals, none of which I'm going to attempt to pronounce. A lot of his work, although by no means all, demonstrated the bold graphic influence of French cartoonist Carandache, and utilised similar remarkably bold flowing outlines and unusual combinations of flat colour. This was a particularly sound stylistic choice for Deni's propagandist posters, which needed the message to be clearly understood. After the October Revolution, Deni worked for the State Publishing House, an organisation established in 1919 to coordinate the various Russian publishing centres working now on behalf of the Bolshevik cause. He produced nearly 50 political posters during the Civil War that followed the revolution, and they included some of his most iconic and powerful satirical work. In 1920, Deni designed the first significant poster featuring the likeness of Lenin, and the crude but eloquent visual shows him as a giant sweeping the smaller enemies of communism off the planet. In 1921, he was employed by Pravda, the Communist Party newspaper, to produce political cartoons, and this became his primary propaganda vehicle of expression for the following decade. And in this period he produced numerous vitriolic images attacking the foreign policies of just about every other powerful country, including Britain, France and America. Despite having earlier made a non-aggression pact with Hitler, Joseph Stalin changed his mind and lined up with the Allies not long after World War II began. Almost immediately Deni returned to poster work and created some of the most savage and eloquent attacks on the Führer and his minions seen during the 5 years of war. And Deni lived just long enough to see Germany defeated and Hitler dead, and he died in 1946 at the age of only 53. Austrian-born illustrator and graphic designer Joseph Binder is another who some may not consider to be particularly unsung. His reputation in graphics has been enduring enough for there to have been an annual competition created in his name. On the other hand, I'm prepared to bet most viewers wouldn't recognise any of his work. Either way, he's included. He was born in Vienna in 1898, and in 1922 he enrolled at the Vienna School of Arts and Crafts. 2 years later, at the age of 26, he set up his own studio, Vienna Graphics, and quickly acquired a reputation as a particularly able and creative advertising artist and poster designer. The work he created early on in his career clearly embraced many of the modernist principles associated with the Art Deco movement, and he was particularly influenced by French poster artist A.M. Cassandra in his futuristic geometric approach. But there was also a pronounced nod in the direction of the equally influential German illustrator Ludwig Hohlwein in his more figurative work. By the early 1930s, he had become a highly respected international figure in design and illustration, and his work was published in Europe, America, and Japan. In 1934, he travelled to the United States, during which time he also became a visiting lecturer at both the Chicago Art Institute and the Minneapolis School of Art. After a couple of years, Binder decided to stay in America for good, and from that point on, most of his better-known work was produced for very high-profile American clients. Among them were both American railroads and United Airlines, in addition to regular work for governmental organisations such as National Defence and the United Nations. And his striking abstracted poster for the World's Fair of 1939 was one of the most celebrated images of its time in the USA. I can't guarantee that it's true of all Binder's work, but there are some originals for sale at auction, and all of them are listed as gouache paintings. And it's safe to assume that he created tonal effects with stippling brush techniques and the use of an airbrush. But whether other methods and media were involved, I can't say for sure. The series of covers he created for Fortune magazine were among his many significant achievements. These powerful dynamic compositions managed to be understandable as representations of what they were, but simultaneously could equally be viewed as purely abstract, aesthetically well-considered modern art. In 1948, the US Navy made him their art director, and he subsequently produced a wealth of material for their recruitment campaigns. As others got left behind by changing fashions following the end of the war, Binder was already about as modern as you could get, and consequently he had no difficulty continuing to produce well-regarded work throughout the following decade. He had always maintained a parallel career as an artist, but in the 1960s he made a conscious decision to turn away completely from commercial graphics to focus on painting, for the rest of his life up to his death in New York in 1972 at the age of 74. And that's it for now, and I hope to see you next time around.